All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our lunch connection. My name is Kim, and I will guide you through our two webinars today. But before we start, I have some more informations for you. Carl, please, next slide. Thanks. Yes, thank you. Your microphones and cameras are disabled, but please write your questions in the Q&A section, and we will answer them right after the presentation in our Q&A session. The recording, we will record this webinar, and you will receive the recording and the presentation by tomorrow. That's all from my side. So, all right, we are very happy to have with us today Carl Bradstreet from JT International. Carl will share with us some insights into how JT International has been able to standardize its business partners, screening, and automate its risk management. So I will hand over to you, Carl. Welcome to the conference, and just have fun.
Thank you very much. And good morning to everyone. I'm Carl Bradstreet, and I'm working in Geneva with JT International as part of JTI Group. And today what I would like to do is present to you a little bit about the concept of know your business partner. So just to give a context of some of the compliance programs and risks that we are managing in terms of our business partners, of course, this includes customers and suppliers. And some of the risks that we look at, of course, are sanction risk, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We also look at intermediaries, community investment partners. We look at sustainability risks, business continuity risks, and also financial crime. Once again, if you have any questions, if you put those questions in the Q&A session, we will answer those questions. I will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So in terms of know your business partner, in the way that JTI, we've been able to standardize in terms of our compliance programs, how we've had this approach. The first concept of know your business partner is really quite simple, is actually who is our business partner. So the important thing is when we have a new business partner, and we define this as either a customer, a supplier, or a bank. And that is a bank, a house bank of JTI, or a bank of our customer, or a bank of our supplier. So what is the first element that's really important for us? Is the first element is it's important that we have a local unique identifier. For example, if our business partner is a business, an organization, we have the business registration number. And that's very important for us because locally, this is how this organization is identified. The next step for us is how we use a universal unique identifier called the DUNS number. And the DUNS number is universally unique because it has a unique number from the life cycle of this company and this organization. It is a unique number globally that is applied by Dun & Bradstreet. And it's important for us because it's a standardized way in which all of our business partners can be identified. And actually through this, we have, to give an example, in our Know Your Customer program, we're using master data enrichment through the DNB API. I will talk more about this a little bit later, but we significantly reduce the manual data entry for our programs because we're capturing this information from Dun & Bradstreet. So that enables us to onboard our customers faster. And enables us to focus actually on the risk. And what does that mean? We can actually automate the risk data or the potential risk for our suppliers. So we can then focus on risk and our follow-up due diligence in those suppliers which are classified as high risk for JTI. In terms of then monitoring, we use that same program. So once we've onboarded a customer or supplier or a bank, we can actually use then that same process to update the information from the business partner. And we receive daily updates in terms of our master data regarding our customers, our suppliers and banks. And that daily update, of course, feeds into our risk data and enrichment process. Which means, once again, actually, we have a standardized way of actually managing risk and focusing on the risk. In other words, we do a lot more due diligence for our high-risk business partners, and we do less due diligence on our low-risk business partners. So we've become very smart in the way we actually manage our risk. And one way we've actually done that is that prior to using the DUNS number and also the enrichment process using the D&B information, prior to that, we actually applied the same due diligence process for all of our business partners, whether they were low risk or high risk, because we simply didn't know. So in our background check investigations, what was interesting is we found that only 3% of those actually found any risks, which actually led us to the fact that we should be focusing on risk. So we actually now only conduct background check investigations on those high-risk customers and suppliers as a result of the API that we use and automating the master data enrichment process. So how do we actually get started in this approach? And this is something that can take quite some time, but in actual fact, for your existing business partners, you can actually do an extract of the business partners and your existing master data, and you can use a service from D&B to actually match all of the DUNS numbers. You needed this in order to utilize the API. So for your existing business partners, identifying the DUNS numbers is actually key, because without this, you can't automate the processes. And D&B can provide that service for you. And in addition to the automated service from Dun Bradstreet, there can be then a follow-up manual search to both from Dun Bradstreet and also yourselves to actually search for all the DUNS numbers for all your business partners that are organizations. And that's important to get started, because that's what you need in order to use the API. You actually need to know the DUNS number. So this is actually quite a detailed screen, but I wanted to give you an indication here of how some of this data enrichment actually takes place. And some of the information that we today extract from Dun Bradstreet and also some other providers, and how we actually manage that risk. So in terms of identification, what's important here is our national registration number. If we use that to have identified the DUNS number, we can then verify all of the other identification numbers, including what the national identification number is, the VAT numbers and tax numbers, the company name, the business registration name, and what the previous names were, as well as all the trade names. That is key for us in order to identify the organization. So, because if we don't have this information, when we start doing due diligence, if we don't have this information, we cannot ascertain 100% actually the due diligence that we do. Is this in fact the business partner or not? Let's give an example to that. So for example, if you do sanctions screening, if you have the registered business name of the business partner and the national ID and the DUNS number, you can categorically identify whether or not you have a hit or an alert in terms of economic sanctions risk or not. If you only screen on your registered name, or you could say a trade name, you may not categorically know whether or not the alert is in fact a true match for economic sanctions or not. If I move on to address and contacts, this is very important here, because what we have in terms of the identification, and by having the API, you can always keep up to date the primary location of the business partner and any changes that are made to it, as well as the registered addresses, and whether or not anything changes. Now, there is actually something highlighted in black here, which is the latitude and longitude. Today, we don't use this information, but we're intending to use this later in 2022. And this is actually something extremely useful in terms of data that you can purchase from a risk management point of view, because if you know exactly the latitude and the longitude of the location of your business partner, you can identify any risk events that might be occurring with your business partner. Because actually the exact location might mean that a supplier or a customer is at risk of a certain risk event or not. For example, in terms of flooding, or for example, in terms of cross-border migration, if you have a supplier or customer that's close to a border, they might be more exposed to certain human rights and sustainability risks than if they are not close to a border. So the latitude and longitude is actually very important to identify potential risks, and that can be mapped with all of the Maplecroft risks where they have subnational data. And we'll come on to that in just a moment. Furthermore, in terms of information that we extract, so we also look at what we call the officers and directors. So who are they? They are the board of directors, the chief executive. There are other executives and other principals that we have in the organization, including then the number of employees in the organization. Why is that important for us? Because in actual fact, these people themselves might be subject to economic sanctions. And furthermore, risks associated with business partners are not necessarily the company themselves, but actually the behavior comes from the people who manage and own the organization. So having information on executives is very important for JTI. It's also important in the sense that in terms of the executives, there may be a person that we have had prior experiences with, and we maybe want to warn ourselves prior to engaging with the business partner that we actually know some of those individuals associated with the business partner. That is so we can actually perform appropriate due diligence and also mitigation steps where that's appropriate. If I take that further and then move down in terms of ownership, likewise, we also have important to understand that we obtain from, in terms of beneficial owners, who are all the majority owners, as well as who are all the minority shareholdings, and who are also the ultimate beneficial owners. And likewise, for the executives, it's important for JTI to understand who we're working with, because in actual fact, it is the management, executives, and owners that you could say behave in certain ways, which might present risks for JTI or not. The other element, though, is in terms of for economic sanction screening, we also use the beneficial ownership in terms of identifying whether or not we have risks. And you'll see here our thresholds are 50% for majority ownership, and for minority holdings, we use this as a test on 20% rule on whether we have any control in whether an organization or an owner has any control within an organization. And we use this for economic sanction screening. In terms of financials, we have just started to use this in our procurement organization to make sure that the yearly revenue, in terms of the money that we spend with a particular supplier, for example, is not more than 10% of the total revenue of a supplier. If it is, it becomes a key supplier for us, and we perform enhanced due diligence. And in terms of risks that we, excuse me, that we then use through the API and is updated, we use, of course, use the D&B rating, but also the business continuity risk. Specifically here, we use the business risk failure score. and where the business risk failure score is moving to high or is high, there is a likelihood, a higher than likelihood, that the business partner will go out of business, will not be a going concern in the next 12 months. And that presents risks for our business to actually manage and make sure that we have potentially alternate business partners. In terms of whether or not, in terms of ownership, whether a business is actually still a viable business and a going concern, another piece of information we extract is the out of business indicator check. What does that actually mean? This actually states whether or not the business is active or not. The legal form might actually present risks if it's a state-owned company. And in terms of the start year, that is the incorporation date. And if the incorporation date is the current year or the previous year, that presents elevated risks for JTI. And we perform an additional due diligence in that regard. Regarding the industry information, by having independent information coming from Dun Bradstreet, we can identify the industry that our business partner is operating in. So what is the primary business activity that they do? The information we extract from the API is called the SIC code, which is a standard industry code, which comes from the US. And we combine that with our Maplecroft data, which I'll explain in just a moment. In terms of company hierarchy, what's important here, of course, is what are those connections internally that we use, because some of our multinational companies, we may not use just one particular customer or supplier, but they might be connected to a whole hierarchy of companies that we use. So in terms of digitization of JTI, we can actually truly understand the importance of a customer or supplier to JTI. If I move across to the Maplecroft risk that we actually use to identify potential risk of our business partners, we commence by actually using the location of the business partner, which we obtain from Dun Bradstreet, as well as the primary business activity. So we can use country risk and also industry risk for the indicators that we use. And those are governance risks, those are sustainability risks. And in the future, we will also use the latitude and longitude data coming from Dun Bradstreet to identify any event risks for our business partners as well. Then in terms of risk and screening and monitoring, what is important here is that the data enrichment process isn't a one-off process. Sure, we have this when we do the onboarding process, but if any of this information changes, or if any of the risk information changes, that could be very pertinent to the way we actually manage the risk for that particular business partner. So what's important about the API here is the fact that depending on the actual data element, this might be updated every day, might be updated monthly, or might be updated periodically. But what's important here is that all of that process is automated. That's useful from a compliance and risk perspective, but also very useful from a master data governance perspective. And of course, also from a business continuity perspective. So in terms of screening and monitoring, what are some of the things that we then do in terms of economic sanction screening? So we do this initially on an ongoing basis. We also have identified here in black here, we also have generating a custom list. What is actually this? This is from our own experience. This is a list of both organizations and also a list of individuals in which JTI wants to know if we are working with or trading with any of these particular either individuals or organizations, so we can take the appropriate steps. We also, for some of our programs, look at the politically exposed persons. And in terms of screening, we also look at, from an automated perspective, and through external risk information. Based on all of the API data that we're obtaining from Dun & Bradstreet, we then identify if any of our individuals, which is a concern, or any of our organizations we work with, have any investigations, any criminal proceedings, any breaches in law or convictions, and if there are any significant fines. We do that when we first onboard our business partner, but we also do that on an ongoing basis based upon the risk of that particular business partner. What enables this API and the use of the DUNS number, and you could say extracting this information, is depending on the risk dimensions and risk domains that you want to manage. This enables you to automate the management of risk and enables you to focus on where the potential risks are for your particular business. So we have enabled that within JTI, and what we're able to do is actually focus on where the risks are for our business, for the risk domains that we actually manage. So what are some of the benefits? Actually, by using the DUNS number, what's important here is this is really the foundation and the pillar to digitalization, not in terms of compliance only, but in terms of everything that you do in your organization, because you could say many processes will be able to be automated and simplified. And that an example of that is, in fact, in terms of master data governance, you actually have a standardized way in terms of knowing who your business partners are and actually doing that in a very systematic way. This also enables you to do continuous monitoring by having automated updates through the API using the DUNS number, which means you actually understand if any risks or any information is changing, which leads to a potential risk change with your business partners. And furthermore, we've used this to simplify the actual questions that we have from our onboarding programs. So our certification processes, what does that actually mean? Well, by having independent information coming through the DUNS number and the API through D&B, what we're able to do is, because we actually know a lot of information of our business partners, we actually don't need to ask those questions. So we actually very much automate the process. So we not only simplify the questions, we very much automate the onboarding and the due diligence process. And so we're then able to also understand and automate our risk process and then our due diligence follow-up process by actually focusing on the actual where the risks are, instead of having the same risk and due diligence profile for all business partners. So we're able to do much more with the same amount of resources within the organization. So in summary here, the DUNS number is key. We have found this as a key way in digitizing what we do within compliance. We're doing the same now for the organization. And we have a new onboarding system, which is commencing next month, where we will use the DUNS number and use the API to automate the process of onboarding our suppliers, not just for compliance programs, but also for the business as well. This is an example of what we've done. Also for the Know Your Customer program, we've also used this API to understand for all of our key customers globally, having independent information of our customers and having daily updates in relation to the API for our customers and our customer certification program. What's this done is able to simplify and automate the program by actually simply using the DUNS number for our businesses, which are customers. So now's the time if we have any questions. So I encourage you, if you have any questions, to ask those questions and to populate them in the Q&A section that you have in your screen. So the first question I have is, how does JDI cope with the various regulations and different sanctions regimes in place in the various countries it operates? This is an excellent question because we've come through a very challenging period in terms of sanctions, where the actual volume of activity has been a 100-fold increase of what we've actually seen previously in previous years. We use the information in terms of business registration information through the DUNS number to make sure that we actually use the registered business name of our business partners. We also use the DUNS number and local identifiers, but we also use the API information to obtain who are the executives and officers in the organization that we operate with, as well as who are the owners, the majority owners, and also the owners who have control in the organizations. And that helps us, together with the watch list that we have, to identify those risks which need to be managed, those sanctions, those economic sanctions which are impacting on JTI, and how we can actually manage those risks. The next question that I have is, does it take more or less time today to onboard a new supplier or a new customer than 5 or 10 years ago? It's a very good question. I don't know the exact answer, but what I can tell you is we've simplified and we've automated those processes for both customers and suppliers, both the initial side and on the ongoing side. And we actually just made a presentation on Monday to one of our regional legal teams, where they're delighted in terms of the way we've simplified and automated processes using the DUNS number. So the work that we're doing is very much appreciated by the business. The next question I have is, what kind of data points can be used for a risk-based approach in the due diligence process? If I go back in the presentation, just one moment. On this data enrichment slide, the data points that we actually use is the DUNS number is actually key for us, as well as the registration name, so the company name that we actually take for identification purposes, the executives, the beneficial ownership, the industry or the primary industry code, the business continuity risk, the yearly revenue and in relation to the spend with JTI, and also the business continuity risk. But what's also important here is actually we then use that to look at the Maplecroft potential risks for the risk domains that we look at. Excuse me. The next question I have is, do you think that compliance screening can ever be fully automated in your organization? Actually, it's a great question, because actually that's what we've just recently achieved, is by making sure that we have a local unique identifier and searching actually for the DUNS number, not just the compliance screening process, but the actual onboarding process for our business partners can be automated if we have the DUNS number for a registered business. And we can have automated daily updates. So not just the compliance screening, but also the onboarding, the master data governance process, and also the compliance screening process can be automated in terms of identifying potential risk. It enables us to be much smarter in the way we manage our risk, focusing actually where the risks are, which means that we can be very tailored and custom with the way we actually do our due diligence process. So in terms of screening, in terms of identifying potential risk, yes, very much today, this is actually simplifying and automating the process, thanks to using the DUNS number and also the API from D&B. So thanks to D&B. And I have a question now from Richard Sekard. How do you handle situations where third parties are not recorded in Dun & Bradstreet? Actually, that's a really good question. We have an example, Richard. We have 14 suppliers, which is contained within our top 85% of spend. So there's about 14 out of 3,000 suppliers. which are individuals. And for these individuals, they are automatically considered high risk. We have also used the same principle where we identify these individuals through a unique identifier. That unique identifier could be their passport number or an equivalent identification document like the national ID, a driver's license, potentially a shooter's or gun license, and so on, depending on the location of that particular supplier. But furthermore, we've experienced that we have approximately 1% of our suppliers, which are organizations, where we do not have a Dun & Bradstreet information. In other words, there is no D&B, there is no DUNS number. And the vast majority of these cases, Richard, are those where we have a sole trader or there are 2 employees in the organization. There is a very few circumstances where we have an actual registered business with an organization behind that business that does not have a DUNS number. So there are some circumstances where there's a registered business that is, I consider, not an organization, which means there is either 1 employee or 2 employees. And in those cases, we actually treat them as an individual. So I hope I answered that question. And nevertheless, if you do identify an organization that does not have a DUNS number, there is in fact a registration process that either the business partner can do or that you can actually register on behalf of the business partner to actually start the process to obtain a DUNS number, where Dun & Bradstreet independently collect the information and verify the information for that business partner. In other words, you're doing a favor for the whole community by doing that. That is unusual, but that does sometimes occur occasionally. If there's no further questions, I think that comes to the conclusion of the presentation today. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for your participation and involvement, and thank you for attending. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you very much, Kai. That was very interesting and easy listening. So thank you very much for that and for now.